Welcome to Nonprofit Stories, inspiring tales from Silicon Valley. We will explore the transformative work of nonprofit organizations and leaders who are changing our community by tackling some of the most pressing issues facing Silicon Valley. So without further ado, let's dive into this exciting conversation. Today, we welcome Alex Shoor, the Executive Director for Catalyze of Silicon Valley. Catalyze SV engages community members, developers, and city leaders to envision and create sustainable, equitable, and vibrant places for people in Silicon Valley.
Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sharon.
Please tell us about the history of your organization and how it all began.
Sure, yeah. Well, we were founded in December of 2016 when 5 people got together in a living room and said, should we start a new nonprofit? And there were a lot of inspirations and there were a lot of issues that led up to that fateful afternoon in December 2016. I think for me, I had lived in a lot of cities across the country: Nashville, Tennessee, New York, Washington, D.C., LA, San Francisco, and I had a really good sense of what made cities dynamic and vibrant places where the next generation wants to come and live. And when I moved back to Santa Clara Valley and moved to San Jose, I was frankly shocked and crestfallen to see the 10th largest city in the country with parking lots in the middle of the downtown.
And which year did you move to San Jose?
I moved to San Jose in 2012, 2013.
Oh, so about 10 years now.
Yep, 10 years. So I was just thinking, how can the 10th largest city in the country have all this empty space in the middle of its downtown? And so that was part of what was me realizing, gosh, we've got to have better development in our community. I had learned a couple years ago living in New York about what sustainable development meant, building buildings and having buildings operate that are environmentally friendly. And then I was working for County Supervisor Ken Yeager, and part of my job was to go out to community meetings and hear community talk about issues, including development projects. And frankly, I was, over time, first confused and then sort of appalled by the community engagement process, that governments and developers didn't really know how to have productive, constructive conversations with community about how their communities are changing and what development could and should look like. And so around that time, I started watching a community advocate, the co-founder of Catalyze SV, it turns out, was doing work in the city of Santa Clara around a site that the city owned that was just sitting there empty. And this community advocate got together with other community members and started to come up with a vision for what could happen on that site. And the vision they came up with was called the Agrihood, an agricultural neighborhood with a farm on site, housing, commercial retail, something that has never been done here in Santa Clara County. And they marshaled so much support for that vision that they came up with that when it came time for the city to say, hey, developers, which of you might be willing to build on this land, one of those 3 developers actually adopted the community's vision, the Agrihood, as their proposal to the city. And lo and behold, that's who the Santa Clara City Council chose to select to build this project. And that was really a light bulb moment for me, saying, oh my gosh, if you get the community together and you rally them toward a common vision of what good development looks like, and you create a community engagement process that allows those voices to be heard, you can transform the way development is done in this community. And so fast forward back to that living room, we said, hey, how can we do this again and again? How can we, A, get the community more involved in shaping what gets built, to B, get better results and more housing and better development? Because that housing crisis was continuing to get worse in our community, and we just haven't built the amount of housing that was needed. So we met that December 2016. We said, hey, let's keep talking. So we met again the next month, and we met again the next month after that, and the month after that, and 5 people became 10, became 15, became 20. And we thought, hey, we might have a real grassroots organization here. And so later on in 17, those folks who were in the living room said, okay, let's create an organization, let's create a mission statement, and eventually they came up with the name Catalyze Silicon Valley, and that was in 2017.
That's so interesting. So tell us about a life-changing story which you have experienced and which involved your organization.
Sure. Well, I think for me, it was sensing how big and bad the housing crisis was becoming. My girlfriend at the time and I were living together in San Jose, and our rent got raised 39% in 2.5 years. And we were solidly middle class. We felt like we would be fine, but we knew that people were struggling way more than we were. We knew that the housing crisis was getting worse, that it was displacing and pushing out people from our community who just can't afford to live here anymore. And so we were fine. We moved to a place a few blocks away, and yet we knew that other people it was a lot harder for. So I think that was how the housing crisis hit home for me. And that's a huge part of what Catalyze SV does, is to say, hey, we want inclusive, diverse communities. We want housing for all people. So that means not just market rate housing for those who can afford it, but also affordable housing and even permanent supportive housing for our homeless community, because as this crisis has gotten worse, our homelessness, our number of homeless folks in our county has gone up, and it's just gotten harder and harder as the income gaps have widened in our community. So I think me experiencing that was just a sliver of what so many other people in our community experience. And it was another moment in the story of Catalyze SV thinking, hey, we've got to advocate more for good housing.
That's so inspiring. What challenges your organization face, and how do you and your team overcome them?
Sure. Well, speaking of advocating for housing, we traditionally in this community, there have been what I would call the voices of no, who say, hey, you want to build a 5-story building, how about 4? You want to build 4, how about 3? You want to build 3, how about 2? And there's always been this constant downward pressure to have less housing built or no housing at all. And that process of downsizing or delaying or outright denying housing has been the predominant voice that Catalyze SV would say has caused this housing crisis. Well, then a second voice emerges, a voice that I would call the yes voice, which says, hey, a developer, you could build 7 stories, but you're choosing to build 5. You could build 20 parking spaces, but you're choosing to build 100. Whatever you want to do, the crisis is so bad, we need the housing, please go ahead and build. And Catalyze SV came around into this advocacy space as what we'd call a third voice, a yes and voice. Yes, we want development, and we want it to be more sustainable, more equitable, and more vibrant. So to your question, Sharad, the challenge we face is, on one hand, the voices of no are saying, oh, wait, so you're just advocating for any housing everywhere. What we're advocating for is good development that incorporates community benefits, that incorporates sustainability. So Catalyze SV members who are involved in advocating for projects care a lot about housing. They also care about transportation. They care about creating a sense of place, what makes a great community, a great neighborhood, a great place. So we move beyond that just, hey, we advocate for whatever the developer wants. In fact, our model is to push developers and say, hey, you could build 7 stories when you're only building 5. Why not go 2 stories higher? You could build fewer parking spaces and more homes, or all that parking that you've got on the ground floor. What if you turn that into childcare or a coffee shop or a restaurant or space for a nonprofit? So that is really what creates dynamic, vibrant neighborhoods. And I think we really challenged the status quo. And it was a challenge for our allies who are pro-housing, for people who are more fearful of change and development in their community. And it was, frankly, a challenge with the development community. It still is, because they're not used to community groups pushing them and saying, we want your project to happen, but we want it to be better. And so we've had to continually educate the development community and say, hey, this is a different way of doing things. We're still going to push you, but we're going to push you in a way that tries to get this project to go forward, not to try to kill it, which has traditionally been the dynamic and the experience that the development community has had.
A typical problem homeowners have when wanting to buy a new home is whether to sell first or buy first. Either way is risky. When ready to look for a new home, TradeMyHome.com, powered by Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty, offers an upfront guaranteed cash offer on your current home. Are you moving in the next 3 to 6 months? Text PAIR to 408-740-7400 for a free and no obligation professional equity appraisal report, exclusively for Nonprofit Stories podcast viewers. For more information, visit TradeMyHome.com or call 408-740-7400. Remember, at TradeMyHome.com, your home is sold guaranteed or we'll buy it.
So give me an example of how do you collaborate and network to resolve some of these challenges?
Yeah, so collaboration is in the ethos of Catalyze SV. It's very central when we're working on an issue, a project, a policy issue, an educational event. We're always thinking, hey, in this moment, on this issue, or in this project, or in this place, who do we have values in common with? Where do we have common goals that we can work toward? And so we do all kinds of things in collaboration with others. For instance, for Women's History Month in March this year, we did an event called Designing for Women, building spaces that prioritize women and children, because we were seeing that more and more developments were including childcare on site, and we thought there's still a need to educate our members and the broader community about why we need to build spaces for women and children. And so we reached out to a bunch of organizations, starting with the Santa Clara County Commission on the Status of Women and the County Office of Women's Policy, and said, hey, we want to do this event. Can you help us put it together and help support it? And from there, we just continued to build out other organizations that are working on issues that support women and children and are building places that prioritize them. And so we had an educational event with 60, 70 people. Some of the folks Catalyze SV had never met before, but because we worked in coalition and in collaboration with these other organizations and government entities, we were able to reach a broader audience. Another example is last year, the city of San Jose was thinking about eliminating mandates that had been around since 1965, saying, hey, if you're a new development, you have to build X number of parking spaces. And that really hadn't gotten the lens of reform that was needed over the years. And so we joined with another number of organizations, led by one called Greenbelt Alliance, to go to city council and say, hey, we don't need as much parking as we think. In fact, the parking that causes more cars to come into our community, which means more pollution and more congestion on our streets and highways. What we really need is to emphasize other ways of getting around, like biking, walking, public transit, car share, scooters, etc. And so we joined with about a dozen organizations to all say, hey, the city is working on this policy, we support it, and continuing to push the city council to vote to approve that. And in December of 2022, they unanimously approved these reforms and moving San Jose in a different direction that's going to be more sustainable in the long run.
And how do you envision the growth of your organization in future years?
Yeah, well, if you're a good nonprofit, you're always thinking, what would close the doors for us? How can we stop doing the work that we are doing? Because that's really the goal. It's not to be an unending entity of growth, it's to achieve a mission. And for us, if every city in Silicon Valley had a community engagement policy, a policy that says, hey, we're going to create a process to talk about the changes in our community, and we're going to invite everyone to the table. And once they're at the table, we're going to make sure that it's a collaborative table, a constructive table, where people, even if they disagree, can have a conversation and try to find some consensus. And once they leave the table, they understand how what they said at that table actually influenced the government's decision. That's what we think is truly good community engagement that will lead to better development. And so for us, if every city in Silicon Valley has a policy and has practices that uphold that process and those values, that's how we could call it a day. And so for us to get there, it might mean growth, Sharad. So that's going to be more staff, working with city government officials on community engagement. You know, when we started this work, we thought, hey, we're going to create a set of principles around what makes community engagement. Providing childcare at meetings, providing food so people feel welcome, because most meetings are between 5 and 9 o'clock on a weeknight when everyone's trying to eat dinner. So we said we're going to throw these principles out into the world, and we expect local government to adopt these principles and start implementing them. And what we were surprised in the change in growth trajectory of our organization was, in fact, government wanted to hire groups like Catalyze SV to help lead the community engagement process. And that's what we've been doing. So part of, in 2020, what we created was a business wing of Catalyze SV that actually provides facilitation and community engagement consulting services to nonprofits, governments, businesses, et cetera. So we've always said, you know, we're a mission-aligned organization. If you do that work in-house, that's great. If you don't, we're here to help. And so I think the growth for us would also be identifying new governments in Silicon Valley and potentially beyond that could use the help of a community-based organization that has experience facilitating difficult conversations, particularly around community development, and helping those governments or those developers be able to have these more inclusive, constructive, and transparent community engagement processes. So that would be another way we could grow. The other way we've grown in recent years is we've looked to other organizations that share our values in Fremont, in Mountain View, in Sunnyvale, and said, hey, we have this process for scoring development projects. We look for community members to score those projects, so it's a grassroots, community-based process. And if you like our process, why don't we score some projects together? So for us, growth might also look like identifying more communities and more groups that share our values, that want to adopt certain ways that we score projects in that process and can learn from our advocacy.
What are some of those principles and key strategies which have helped your organization succeed so far?
Yeah. Well, I think this yes and approach is very different. And even though it's nuanced and it requires a lot of time informing developers, because developers are traditionally with the community, it's like they want to see a thumbs up or they want to see a thumbs down. And at least they know either way where they stand. So for us, one of the strategies has been to say, hey, we're going to give you input. And the more you incorporate that input, we can rescore your project higher. And when we rescore your project higher, we can also praise you for being responsive to a community-based organization. And so we call this the improve, then approve strategy. The more improvements the developer makes to their project, the more likely we are to advocate without reservation for it to be approved. And so we try to reach out to developers really early in the process. We don't show up the month before or the week before the project is coming to a planning commission or a city council and ask for our requests. We do that a year or two in advance, where the developer can incorporate those ideas more easily as their project is moving through the public process. So a strategy we like to employ is get good ideas from community members about how to make development as good as possible for as many people as possible into the hands of developers as early as possible so they can make better projects. So that's really a key strategy for us. The other key strategy is just to talk with government about what it looks like to do good community engagement. And sometimes we're out on social media and saying, hey, look at this government agency doing this great job. They're putting up a jam board. They're creating an interactive way that community members can share input. And sometimes it's saying, hey, we think you could do better, that meeting didn't go so well, that people were really riled up and super angry, and maybe there's a better way to conduct and create a good community meeting. So a strategy for us is, like a lot of advocacy organizations, you sometimes are talking to folks privately on the inside, and sometimes you have to call your members to speak out. And so when a project is approaching or a policy issue is approaching a final vote, we send out action alerts to our listserv of about 2,000 folks. And we say, hey, here's an issue coming up, a project or a policy or a moment. Weigh in, share your opinions. Here's what we think. Here's what our members helped shape earlier in the process. And now you can take all this information that we've created for you and use it to do something better. we're also working with a partnership formerly with the organization Code for San Jose, which is a group of coders and programmers who volunteer to make civic engagement work better through technology.
Oh,
And we're working to develop a tool through our website that'll make it easier for anyone to locate projects that they're interested in, perhaps those near their homes, learn about what those projects are in terms of the developer's proposal, and then provide feedback through our website to be able to do that. So we've got a technical program manager with experience in tech who's working with volunteers in the community, volunteers in Code for San Jose to build out that technology. Because at the end of the day, we want anyone, regardless of education, immigration status, language abilities, age, race, etc. We want them to be able to participate in the process
sure.
of what gets developed in their community. And so we think that if you can just provide a little bit more input and understand how that input is being used to change your community, that you will feel more connected to your democracy.
That's interesting. You are doing such great work, Alex. And what inspires you to now start your campaign for City Council?
Yeah, so I'm running for San Jose City Council, and I'm really excited about it. I absolutely love the work that I do at Catalyze SV, and it's truly a dream job. It's truly a calling. And yet, I also feel called by a big issue in San Jose, which is San Jose's become, and there's stats from joint venture Silicon Valley to other research that says this area is now the most unequal place in the country. And that level of inequality isn't good for anyone. It's certainly not good for our sadly growing number of homeless folks in our community. It's not good for working class folks who are getting pushed out of this community. It's not good for middle class people who may not be able to see their grandparents or their grandchildren be able to live here, who may choose to go to those other cities where that tech salary might take them a lot farther than it does here. And it's actually also not good for the most well-off in our community. They too are seeing the blight and the empty storefronts and the homelessness in our community, and it's really tearing at the fabric of our community.
Right.
And I don't think that's good for anyone. And so the work we do at Catalyze SV is to try to both advocate for more housing and better development, but also manage that from a community perspective, that we acknowledge that it's hard for people to see change, and change can engender fear in people. And so for me, I'm running a campaign based on a theme called building community.
I see.
That's really building off of the work at Catalyze SV and saying, yes, we have to literally build physical community. We have to build sustainable, vibrant places that are affordable for everyone. But we also have to do that in a way that respects those who have been here, that celebrates the history and culture of this place, and also allows those folks to say, hey, it's okay if more people live next door to you. In fact, it might raise your property values. It might introduce you to your next neighbor or your dog sitter.
That's true.
And so there's so many benefits to allowing more folks to come into our community. At the end of the day, we're a capitalist society. We require new people in our community to pay taxes so that we can have the services that we need. And frankly speaking, when you build densely above about 3 or 4 stories on a building, it actually generates revenue for the city's tax coffers, which is what we need in a city like San Jose that sometimes struggles with revenue. So there's a lot of issues I'm super passionate about. I think for me, it's about trying to help the city government and the community realize that we've got to do a lot better development a lot quicker if we're really going to continue to be a community that has connections to one another.
That's so inspiring. And when is your campaign getting kicked off?
So we're having a kickoff event coming up August 12th, Saturday, August 12th, from 9 to 11:30 a.m. at the Rose Garden Farmers Market, which is across the street from Lincoln High School. Anyone's welcome. I'll be sharing more of my vision for San Jose, and it's going to be a constant push in the campaign until March 2024, which is when the primary is going to be held.
Well, it was so nice speaking with you, Alex, and we wish you all the best
Thank you.
in your current position and also going forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
It's time for our trivia question to win prizes. This section is hosted by our AI host, Kay.
Hi, this is Kay from TradeMyHome.com, powered by Your Home Sold Guaranteed Realty. Your home sold guaranteed, or we'll buy it. Here is our NPS trivia question. With a mission to eradicate global poverty, which nonprofit organization is known for its famous Red campaign? And your options are Amnesty International, UNICEF, or One Campaign. Again, your options are Amnesty International, UNICEF, or One Campaign. Winners will get a $25 Amazon gift card and recognition in our next episode. Submit your entry on our website, nonprofitstories.trademyhome.com, or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Only the top 3 correct entries will win.
Thank you for listening to the podcast and acknowledging the impactful work of nonprofits in Silicon Valley. Please subscribe and share this episode with a friend. Thank you to our sponsor, TradeMyHome.com, for their community commitment and for making this podcast possible. Until next time, remember to support local nonprofits.